One more. There you go.
Sweet.
Thank you for your technical support, Terry. So today we're going to dive into pricing beyond food cost. Got to think of value, convenience, and also always think about the experience for catering and what you're selling. We're going to talk a little bit about creating bundles and packages and how to simplify those choices and increase check or AOV. We're going to talk a little bit about pricing for occasions and group sizes. So whether you have per person or bundles, and I'll hopefully give you a few nuggets on how to approach that. Obviously, what's most important is that you have a profitable business. So we're going to talk a little bit about protecting margin, which takes a good collaboration with finance and your overall senior team in setting some targets. So we're going to talk to always consider the packaging, the labeling, and the fees, and how you model that straight to the consumer. How data and seasonal adjustments might come into play, and then we'll kind of wrap up with Q&A. Next slide, please. So if this is the first time you're joining, thank you for joining. As I said, we're diving into price, but you can visit YouTube or the Catered Link community to see my past webinars where I've been talking about the 5P framework. So I discussed product. Now we're going to talk price. And then in the future, we'll be talking about place, promotion, and people. Next slide. Okay. So beyond food costs. So really when you're thinking of successful pricing for off-premise and catering, you shouldn't just copy the dine-in menu. Guests aren't just buying the food. They're usually paying for complete, hassle-free convenience, as well as how you're taking your food from the dine-in menu and creating applications that make sense for the off-premise business. So some brands will factor in convenience and time savings into the price. But if you were on my past webinar on packaging and the framework, please always keep in mind that you understand your competitive set, because you definitely want to be priced to sell and be competitive. So you've got to consider packaging. You got to consider serving size, portability of how your items travel and how they're packaged to travel to maintain quality and ease. And then you want to include service value like delivery and setup and special handling. So you want to consider, what are your services? Are you going to deliver and then set everything up? Are you going to have an option to set up and stay with staff, or just drop and go is what they call? I put a little pro tip on each of these slides, and this one's talk about taking price to reflect the full experience of what you're offering, not just what's on the plate. Next slide, Terry. So as we continue, I wanted to talk about one of the most valuable, I call it menu categories for catering, is bundles and packages. So you want to curate the bundles simply for the ordering process to drive higher check averages. Also think of clicks on your digital experience. So you want to make sure that it's an ease and that the consumers are straightforward in what they're selecting, as well as minimize the amount of clicks that they might. What I mean by that is, if you're creating a package, the package might include 2 sides always, but then the consumer can choose, let's say, a protein or a side dish. So just make sure you're understanding the journey, digital ordering for your guests, and keep it to a minimum. You could also consider tiered options. Sometimes if you want to have different sizes of bundles or packages, small, medium, large, or you could get creative with your brand and have bronze, silver, gold. So just think of different ways that you want to package that. One of the target amounts for packages is usually feeds 10. That's a good sweet spot. So I've seen some brands that create smaller packages for what I call consumer, like eat at home. And those are usually targeting to feed 4 to 6. The catering sweet spot is usually feeds 10 to 12. And that way, if they have 20 people, they can purchase 2 bundles, etc. You want to reduce the decision fatigue with set meal bundles. So you definitely want to make sure that you're in sync with the marketing team and the innovation team, and post new news. As the brand may have new items, you want to think of how those translate into your off-premise business or catering. Use clear names and descriptions. So I've been on some sites where I noticed that the descriptions really don't share with the consumer how many that package or bundle may feed. You've got to remember the consumer sometimes doesn't know. So I'm always a big advocate advocate of making sure that your menu descriptions clearly state how much that package, serves, how many will it feed. And then you can have any sub copy that helps understand how they might do multiples. The pro tip here is be creative with your naming. Have fun with it. So above I talked about tiered options, small, medium, large, but maybe it's bronze, silver, and gold, as well as having fun with the names of your bundles that are on point and follow the brand guidelines and help gently guide the guest toward premium choices. So always think of also when you're creating bundles and packages, some of the digital experiences or tech out there will allow you to have what we call we recommend or options that'll pop up towards the end of the catering order so that you can drive AOV in check. For instance, the consumer, if it's a smart cart technology, perhaps ordered a meal that did not include desserts, that we recommend that you want to create on the back end might be to suggest desserts, a cookie platter, brownies, etc. It might also not include beverages. So again, you would want to recommend, would you like to add on a gallon of tea or bottled waters? Next slide. Now we're going to talk just a little bit about occasions and group size. So there's different ordering occasions require different pricing strategies. So when you think of your overall menu, one of the most popular ones is using a per pricing strategy for like what I call more buffet. So you might have a package where you're presenting a combination lunch meal where it's got a choice of 2 sides and a protein, and everything is in the back end of the recipe is a per person serving, and you want to price it accordingly. This is best targeted for those 10 to 50 and larger orders so that guests can literally order the exact quantity based on their final attendance. You can use bundles, which I talked about a little bit in the previous slides, or party platters for smaller groups or occasions. So what I think are some great innovative ideas is you've got to also understand B2B, which is business, or B2C, which is consumer. And those are those family occasions. So I was looking at a brand the other day and helping them create some family packages, right? Some things where the family doesn't feel like cooking that night and they can grab and go a package that feeds 4 to 6 and is a good assortment of your food. As well as the bundles for catering. So maybe smaller groups that are 8 to 10, 10 to 15. And then as I keep honing in on, clearly list how many each bundle serves to make ordering easy. A lot of times when I'm working with a brand, I do kind of a SWOT analysis or go on and I notice their website is they don't list that in their description, right? It just says the bundle. It doesn't say how many it serves. And the end user is going to really want to understand that, as well as we'll talk a little bit about backing into that price and being aware of what that per person price is based on the bundle. For example, if your bundle feeds 10 and the price is $200, you need to be cognizant that that price is $20 per person. So that's just an example. And then label things. Make sure that once you've got your clear journey on your digital and your print menu, that you're also labeling at the end for production and delivery. So guests feel confident about their choices and that they were delivered the correct products. Next slide. Okay, a big one. Got to protect margin, right? The most successful catering, launches are making sure that they return. And actually, catering orders, because they're larger and the AOVs or the average order totals are anywhere between 250 and higher, depending on what type of brand you are, whether it be fast casual, quick serve, or fine dining, is that you have the ability to leverage some of your fixed assets, consolidate some of your labor, as well as understand your packaging cost. So some brands also, want to factor in packaging and utensils and delivery fees. So early on, you want to align with your finance team and say, are we going to do cost of sales and food cost for our menu pricing? But in an overall look at the P&L, I want to understand, what is my average packaging cost? What is my average labor cost? Am I leveraging heart of house production? And so really, I just need to track labor costs for the actual delivery personnel and things like that, as well as staying competitive with your fees. You really want to understand, what are you charging to the consumer, and make sure that you stay in a target that is reasonable as well as competitive. You don't want to have a lot of plus and charge everything, because you could reduce overall order volume. And then make sure on the back end that you're including extra prep time or staffing is needed, depending on the size of the order. And then you can also present an all-inclusive price to avoid guest surprise, which is really popular with the bundles in the packages. So make sure you build these hidden costs into your pricing upfront to protect margins and create a seamless guest experience. So you really want to understand what is your overall financial target. And then usually I always suggest that people are looking at the overall return and PMIX monthly, if not more consistently, based on the information that they have. Next slide. Data and seasonal. So this is also where you may look at LTOs, maybe you're launching a new item or you have different seasons and your marketing is around certain occasions. Like the big one I think everyone's working on right now for catering is back to school, right? So back to school has quite a broad appeal, and you could have anything from packages for the teachers getting ready to set up the classrooms to per person buffets for the people returning, for the sports teams that are kicking off. So make sure that you're looking at your menus and possibly sorting those and promoting the items that make the most sense for how you're marketing. You can track the sales trends. You always want to understand guest feedback on the items that you're selling. So I tend to get deep into the comments of the patrons that are actually ordering our food. And then you want to identify other peak moments. Holidays is a really growing appeal. So the holidays is a great time, and you could actually think of limited time offers for the holiday season. As I just mentioned, schools, and we're not necessarily graduating yet because we're still just starting school, but you also got game days and sporting occasions. So sometimes with watching parties and games, you might want to highlight food that is appropriate to that type of occasion. And then, as I mentioned, introducing limited time premium bundles to capture seasonal demand. And then even small seasonal tweaks can drive significant incremental sales and profit. So the more you know your numbers and you know which items return, the better that you can promote the items to build overall AOV and improve margin on the items sold. Next slide. So I'm going to wrap it up a little bit. I really did keep this a little bit high level for those people that really have not figured out or started or know where to start on creating their pricing strategy. And one thing I like to share with people is off-premise pricing isn't just about covering food costs. It's about creating a balanced strategy that kind of, reflects the value. Got to protect margins and make it a viable profit center for the brand, and then supports brand consistency and what you're bringing at the end to the consumer. You're protecting quality and the brand equities. So some of the key takeaways, that I like to think about is you've also got to think about experience. So I talked a little bit about bundles. There's also party platters. So think of it as the experience is I want to create a party platter and I want to make it easy for the consumer. If it's at home, that they can literally just pop the lid and they're ready to go. So you want to think of convenience and what is the experience with the type of food that you've created and your menu, not just the ingredients. And what do you need to include? Serving utensils, plates, etc. Consider price parity. So consumers are getting smarter and smarter every day. And what I mean about consider price parity is if you have a la carte items or your dine-in menu, when you're looking at off-premise and catering items, you want to make sure that there's some kind of perceived value. An example might be you created a box lunch. Let's say you have a couple different types of box lunches. You have like a plain, kind of simple, straightforward sandwich and chips. Is that box lunch, and are you able to price it where there's a little bit of perceived value from if the consumer was to purchase chips and a sandwich a la carte? Because you can leverage some of the built-in assets of labor and packaging. And then use bundles and tiered packagings, which I've talked a lot about today, to simplify ordering. Always got to think about the keystrokes, right? And the choice groups when you're ordering. So once you have the framework of your menu, which we talked about product on the last webinar, now you've kind of firmed up pricing. You feel good that you have a target COGS and cost of sales. You understand which items are going to be profitable, and the mix of your menu. Now you really want to understand how you're going to present them digitally as well as your print menu. And then protect margin by factoring in hidden costs, which we talked a little bit. This sometimes is an alignment with finance. I've been with brands where we didn't necessarily include the packaging cost and the price to consumer, but we did look at it when we looked at the overall return for the catering segment of the business. So really just need to align quickly there. I've also worked for brands where we had a small amount, whether it be a percentage or a flat amount that we would automatically add after we did the homework of what the food cost was. And that helped protect the margins as well. And then adjust based on data, seasonality, and guest feedback. Stay close when you're launching a new menu. Make sure you're getting feedback not only from the guest, but talk to the operators. Talk to the individuals that are actually delivering the food, and that'll allow you to iterate and refine. And when I talked about product in the last webinar, also P-mix. And P-mix is just product mix, right? Like if I have 10 menu items, which ones are making up the largest percentage of sales? And so there might be some nuggets that you can unfold when you're looking at that. Next slide. So I tried to put together some just really basic work, again, for those people that pricing may be new to. And these are some financial models to guide pricing. So there's cost plus pricing, and this is really the base price of total cost. So once you have your recipes and your portions, you're going to have unit of measure, and you're going to have the cost of that unit of measure. And so you can kind of literally build what is the cost of that final product, whether it's a box lunch, or it's a party platter, or it's a per person bundle, and then you can plus total margin. There's per person pricing, which is clear and predictable. And again, it's based on the portions, the cost for each of those portions, and then you have the total. You have bundled and tier pricing, which sometimes can encourage higher check averages, and perceived value of the individual items. So earlier I had mentioned you have an a la carte menu and customers are getting smarter and smarter. And I know I can get a side of an item for $2. If I create a bundle that has two sides, you want to build in some perceived value. I don't think there's one answer that fits everybody, but I tend to think in between that 8 and 10% value that you want to attribute to that price when you're bundling things. And then you can also do a break-even analysis to calculate how many orders are needed at any given price to stay profitable. So remember to be thoughtful. I'm big on data, so really use the data to your benefit, helps the guests feel the value, and keeps Optimus and Catering profitable as you continue to grow and not sacrifice brand trust, right? Next slide. So now I'm going to open it up to Q&A. So okay, we currently offer only bundles for breakfast and lunch sandwiches. Is per person ordering better from a customer perspective with a minimum order amount? I see restaurants use both methods. Bundles are easier to manage, but sometimes confusing for the customers. I really think you could have both. So when I think of bundles, maybe you think of platters is probably more of a key word, but do you have a bundle where it's maybe a platter of fruit? Let's say breakfast, since that's what we're talking about. So you have an assorted fruit platter. That assorted fruit platter feeds 10 to 12. And then let's say you have sweet bread. So you bundle it with a sweet bread platter, and that also feeds 10 to 12. So you want to make sure you're bundling it with like items based on the size. So in this example, I've got the fruit and then the sweet breads, and I'm going to bundle it if they get both. And let's say add orange juice. It's a set price for 10 people. I had mentioned earlier, the smart consumers might go, okay, well, that equals $200 divided by 10. It's $20 per person. Are you aware of what is that party platter individually, sweetbread individually, and orange juice individually, and is there perceived value? And that's where I say target like a 5 to 10% discount. So if a customer bought those items individually, it would be a little bit more. When you think of per person, it really, I think two things I think of. Got to make sure that you have production. Are you supported by doing all of that math on the amounts per person. Yes, per person can be a little bit more straightforward. And if you're doing per person, I definitely would have a minimum. And I usually, most brands are targeting a minimum of 10. And then you also have to think of packaging though. And I'm not trying to complicate it, but if your item is minimum 10 people and you're doing per person, and let's say it's a fajita bar, and fajita bar has, let's say, the grilled chicken, the mesquite chicken, or the mesquite steak, do you have the right packaging? So if a consumer actually got that minimum, that you have perceived value, is that container full? So there is some engineering in the packaging that you need to do, which may inform some of your minimum counts, because perhaps you want to keep the SKUs smaller. And so you only have half pans as an example. And when you kind of weigh that out into half pans, they kind of look empty. So that might force you to initially start with making your minimum 15. So the perceived value is that the container is somewhat full. Next question. To clarify, do you recommend per item pricing or bundle pricing, such as a 10 pack? If a bundle is okay to offer both per person and bundle for odd numbers for same item, or too confusing? It's a great question, but I'm a little confused. Bundle pricing to me is when you're creating a package, right? Like I use the fruit platter and a sweet platter, and you're saying in the menu description, this bundle feeds 10 people or 10 to 12, right? Some variability. Per person is a meal that you're selling, and you could have several different, and maybe this is where the vernacular gets you, because some people call it the bundles, is that you have a meal that serves, but it's based per person. Example, I have a fajita buffet. I have a plain fajita buffet, and it's priced at $10 per person, and the customer at the end is going to order based on their final guest count. I have 12 people. There's a recipe behind it to make sure that those servings are giving 12 of each item within that bundle or per person. You could also then, under your per person menu pricing, have one that's add desserts. So some of it's on the back end engineering, what goes in each of those packages, whether it be per person or bundles. So I hope I've answered your question. What kind of premium would you add for this extra service? Are we talking a few percent or more? Example, $10 sandwich plus the tray cost would be $10.50 plus delivery. Doesn't that include the experience and value? Just curious, what is best practice on that added pricing? So if you know your packaging cost, for instance, in this, they're saying an example, $10 sandwich plus the tray cost is roughly, I think you're saying 50 cents per person. You may add that, right, to look at your total margins. I don't usually, and nor have I seen a lot of brands include service fees in their menu pricing. That's usually after, right? So there's the menu prices. Usually you've got to decide, is it going to be just food cost or food cost plus a generic, cost of packaging? So you can do some exercises to understand your average. And to do those exercises, really, again, if your minimum's 10, then model out the packaging, every single napkin and the cost of each of those, the utensils, the platters. You're going to be able to leverage some of your packaging when it comes into the half pans, right? Because it's not necessarily a one-to-one or a party platter. That party platter might serve 10 people. So just make sure you're understanding the math there. Next question. What financial metric is most helpful for off-premise pricing? Contribution margin is a big one. That's the profit of each item or bundle, covering direct cost. It tells you which menus are actually contributing to the bottom line. Next question. What's simple first step if we've never built bundles before? Great question. I think start simple, right? Also, when I was talking about product in my last webinar, I'll bring it up today. Really understand your competitive set. be resourceful, see what the consumers are buying. So think of some of the brands that are very mature in their state and understanding, kind of what are they bringing to market. Most common are, if you're a sandwich brand, you've got individual because you want a grab and go occasion. You also have platters, and then sometimes you have kind of build your own options. So I always say if it's brand new to you, start simple. You can always iterate and add on later. And look at your top selling items and group them into, as I said earlier, whether you have a small and a large, make sure you know feeds by, right? Maybe your small is more that family target or consumer occasion, and that's kind of your 4 to 6. Your catering's more minimum 10, so maybe you just have one size. I don't think you need a lot of sizes. So just think of what your average order is, and 10 seems to be a good target for most brands. Price them so that guests can see the savings. So earlier I said if guests are getting smarter and smarter, and if that consumer that's ordering for the group notices that they can buy certain items a la carte for X price, make sure that if you've bundled them that there's perceived value. And again, I'm usually between that 5 and 10% discount. So if I bought 10 sides of mashed potatoes, the one that feeds 10 people is that there's a slight discount for purchasing that larger portion. And then even basic bundles can drive higher checks and make ordering easier. So you got to take that into consideration. Next question. Okay, so how often should a restaurant revisit off-premise pricing? I usually think if you can't do quarterly, because there's a lot of work that goes into it, at least twice a year, as well as you also have to understand your brand and how often is that brand launching new items, because the homework behind continuing to leverage and bring new news, which is new menu items or limited time offers, is you want to make sure you understand what is going to be the application of that new menu item in catering. So if a brand, let's say, launches a bowl, right? They've never launched bowls. I'm thinking of a brand that just did that. You want to think about, well, how am I going to position these new bowls for catering? Am I going to have a create your own per person bar where they build their own? And I've got to work out all the cosmetics of that recipe and pricing per person as well as portions per person. Am I going to have individual bowls, for that more grab and go occasion? So definitely stay in sync. And I'm sure most people are with the marketing and innovation team, culinary purchasing, and make sure that you have time so that you can approach the national rollout with not only what are we doing for dine-in, but also what is that application for off-premise. I also do suggest to some brands, if it's a test item, or I mentioned LTO, you might wait till that succeeds, right? And shows that it's going to have some longevity with the brand, and then usually add that item once it's more tested, embedded to the actual catering offerings for your brand. Next question. I think I already mentioned this, but the question is, should off-premise pricing always match dine-in? Not necessarily. And again, I've talked about it a couple times. You want to have perceived value, right? So I think you're always going to understand your dine-in because that's kind of already been very vetted as far as your returns. But make sure you partner with finance and you understand, okay, now how am I going to price this? Because the portions may be different. An example, I have a plated meal in store. I'm going to use like a center of the plate protein, 2 sides, and maybe that center of the plate is a 10-ounce steak. Well, in catering, some of the target things that I've learned and put forward is we're going to do a 6-ounce portion, right, of it. So you need to understand cosmetically the difference in portions. And is it apples and apples, or is it different? And you can have some perceived value there as well, making sure that you understand what is the average person consuming and how have you positioned that item. Have you positioned it as a lunch buffet? Because I said 6 ounces versus the 10-ounce steak inside for dinner and things like that. How do you know if your off-premise bundles are priced right? Hopefully I gave you some, if you're thinking of bundles as I think of different items, right? Also bundles are could be the full meal expendable. So I've created a bundle and I've done the work to understand what the cost is of all those items. And say in one bundle, it's an appetizer that automatically includes bread it is 2 proteins, 2 sides, and dessert. Is first, you understand the cost of that, but you also understand what is the per person. So if you did the math, I had a brand that I was working with the other day, and they had some opportunities with their bundles, because their bundles, when I did the work and said, you've brought this to market as serving 10, right? The bundle served 10, by the way. And I did the math. So I divided that price by 10, and it was saying $20 per person. I then looked at the individual items, even some of it was on their catering menu. And if I had bought as a consumer those individual items, it was 15. So that's not priced right. So you need to understand whether you do the math in presenting that package, or you do the per person that there's perceived value. Next question, if there are any more. What's one way to explain to guests why off-premise or catering prices might differ? I think you've got to share the experience. I'm not necessarily a fan for getting into the weeds with consumers and explain, well, we have packaging cost and things like that. I think you have to stay kind of guest friendly or guest centric and just talk about how we package it, how the portions may be different. In some occasions, your portions might be more than what they are, because some of the things that I've learned and have become what I call sweet spots for me is understanding how much to portion for a side, as an example. A half a cup or 4 ounces, is an average in a group setting. So I think that if you've done that homework, you should be set up for success. And then also listen to your guests, listen to the operator, and do the homework early on, right? Like, make sure you've compared some of the items. And then transparency is 100%. So I think in one of the earlier slides, also make sure your descriptions are truly stating exactly what you're selling. There was one brand where it could have been, let's say, an all you can eat, but for catering, it wasn't all you can eat. And so we were very transparent in sharing exactly what are the portions for each of the items within a menu. And make it guest friendly, right? Like, you not necessarily ounces, because some admins that are ordering don't necessarily, know that, but you can say a lunch portion that averages 4 to 6 ounces per person. Our sides are a healthy, bountiful half cup portion. So things like that. One more question on this topic, because I've struggled with this. If it's just one item, such as a breakfast sandwich with no other items included in the platter, which would be better to offer overall? Per person pricing, such as in ordering 18 sandwiches a la carte, or a platter of 10 each? So customer would have to order 2 platters. Thank you. Think you've been helpful. I think both. I hope you don't like that answer. If you know the sweet spot, which I said, usually the sweet spot for catering has been kind of this target 10 to 12 customers is like an average ticket. Or do you have any history of what your average ticket is for your brand? Maybe your brand's average ticket is 15. So maybe you want your minimum to be 15, et cetera, or you want to grab some of those lower tickets and make it 10. So I would create platters that feed that target, that serve the average order of 10 to 12. So, is feeding 10 to 12, 10 half sandwiches, or in the middle of 10 to 12, 11 of each. And then a la carte, in this example, is this breakfast sandwich? I would have a platter. I would have a bar, like something where they create your own, and you're bringing those. So some brands do breakfast sandwiches in those boxes that help keep them neat, and you have a set recipe, and those can be per person, right? So maybe this bar includes your breakfast sandwiches, and then they have the option to add fruit. What you need to know in the back end is, what is that recipe, so that the kitchen is producing the right amount of items. And then earlier I mentioned, but you need to understand your packaging. If your box, which a lot of people have seen, right, like Subway sandwich box, every brand's been using them, pretty much, but they're like a box with a thing, a lid, is make sure if you've targeted 10 minimum, and you have that many items in what you're selling, that box is full. If I've answered the question. Well, good. Well, I hope I've given some, information for those that haven't. You can always reach out on Catered Linked if you've got any other follow-up questions on anything I'm presenting. And I hope you'll have fun with it. The next series is next month, where I'll continue my 5P framework, and we'll discuss promotions, which was one of my favorite. So hope you have a great day, and look forward to working with you and helping you succeed in winning in this space. Have a great day.